Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and this is the definitive guide to Hosted UniFi updated for 2021. In this video, we're going to show you start to finish how to set up a secure hosted UniFi controller for multiple UniFi sites. Alright, so there is a blog post that goes along with this video. I will have a link down below to that blog post. In that blog post are full written instructions for everything that I'm going to talk about in this video. In the video portion, I'm going to be moving a little bit quickly, so refer to the blog post because everything is laid out step by step, makes it nice and easy for you. Also, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you give us a like and subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter at CrosstalkSOL. Or if you've just found this guide super helpful and you want to buy me a beer, there's also a link down below in the description where you can buy me a beer. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Up on my screen here, I have the definitive guide to Hosted UniFi 2021. This is the blog post that I'm going to be following along with. Right at the top here, you can see an example of a starter kit for UniFi. If you're just getting into the UniFi suite of products, well, for about $555, you can get a really nice starter network that I have detailed for you right here. In this guide, we are going to be setting up a UniFi controller version 6.0.43, at least that's the version as of the recording of this video, and we're going to be installing it onto Ubuntu version 20.04. We're going to be using Vultr as our hosting provider, and if you do not have a Vultr account, there is a link where you can sign up for Vultr. That link will not change your price at all, but in fact it will get you $100 worth of Vultr credit if you use my referral link. So I certainly appreciate any referrals that I get. If you're more of a fan of DigitalOcean, this exact same process works on DigitalOcean with the exception of the initial droplet or virtual machine setup. That's going to be a little bit different for DigitalOcean, but actually very similar. You're just basically pressing a few different buttons for DigitalOcean. And I also have a DigitalOcean referral link right down here if you're interested in signing up for DigitalOcean. Part 1 is to install our virtual server. Again, we're going to be using Ubuntu 20.04 for this hosted UniFi controller. So you want to log into Vultr. And once you're logged into Vultr, you're going to see this page here. You just want to click the blue plus symbol right here on the right-hand side, and that's going to deploy a new server. So for choose server, we're just going to choose cloud compute, and then we're going to scroll down a little bit here. For server location, I typically just pick a server that's geographically close to where I am located, but of course you can pick whichever geographic location you want. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to choose Seattle here in the United States. Scroll down a bit more and we get to the server type. I'm going to choose 64-bit OS, and then I'm going to come over here to Ubuntu and I'm going to click it, and I'm going to choose 20.04x64. For the server size, you can choose whatever size you like. For just a very small UniFi controller with a few sites and maybe a couple dozen devices, the $5 tier is going to work perfectly fine. Or if you're just trying to test out UniFi, if you're learning the platform, the $5 a month controller is perfectly fine for this purpose. Scrolling down even further, we have our additional features. The only one that I would really recommend enabling here is the auto backups. Reason being is that, well, it'll automatically create a backup for you on a regular basis. Now, you'll have backups created in UniFi, but the more backups you have, the better, and for an extra $1 a month, it's not too bad, especially if you're running a production UniFi system. It might just save your butt one day. Of course, if you're just doing this as a test, you don't necessarily have to enable the auto backups, but again, I'm going to go ahead and check the box. Finally, you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and where it says server hostname and label, you want to enter in an FQDN, or a fully qualified domain name. Now, for me, I'm going to use unifi2021.crosstalksolutions.com. This should be a valid domain name where you own the domain. In my case, I own the crosstalksolutions.com domain because the next step is we're going to have to create a DNS A record for the name that we create for our server. That's going to be very important because we're going to be using Let's Encrypt to secure the server towards the end of this documentation. All right, once you have everything in place, go ahead and click on Deploy Now, and you should be taken back to the dashboard, and it'll take about a minute or two for your virtual machine to fire up. While the virtual machine is initializing, this is actually a really good time to go log into your domain hosting provider and add a new DNS A record. If you click on the server that you just created, you can see the IP address right here, and you can click this little icon to copy that IP address. So you want to log into your hosting provider. This is beyond the scope of this video because there's a ton of different hosting providers and many different ways to do this. But ultimately you want to create a DNS A record for the name that you gave your server. In my case, it's unify2021.crosstalksolutions.com. And you want to point that DNS A record to the IP address of your new Vultr hosted server instance. Notice also on this screen we have the password for root. You can also copy that password by clicking this icon right here. We're going to need that password in just a bit, but we are going to change that root password as like the very first step when we first log into the server. Okay, so after a minute or two, the server should be up and running. You should have the IP address. Hopefully your fully qualified domain name is now pinging that IP address. Like if you ping unify2021.crosstalksolutions.com or your own FQDN, it should resolve to that IP address. So here I have opened up PuTTY, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the Vultr instance, and to start off I'm just going to grab the IP address. We're going to copy that, and in PuTTY we're just going to paste that where it says hostname, and we're going to click open. You're going to get this PuTTY security alert. Just go ahead and click yes. And now we want to log in as root. Press enter. Now we need to grab our password. So I'm going to come back here to Vultr. I'm going to copy the password, go back to PuTTY, and we're going to paste that password in. You can paste with Shift Insert and press enter. And there we go. We have now logged into our brand new Hosted UniFi controller for the first time, but we have not done any configuration yet. So the first thing that we're going to do, since we just logged in, let's change the password for root and make sure that you make it a very strong password. Now, a little side note here, we're going to be disabling root access to the server. So you won't be able to actually log into the server as the root user by the time that we're done with this tutorial. I mean, that's a security risk. So we're going to change the username that is allowed to log in, and we're not going to allow root to log in. However, the password that you set for root is still going to be used for elevated commands, for running the sudo commands, right? So we're going to need to remember the password that we create for you for root and make sure that it's a nice, strong password. So to do that, we're going to say password, PASSWD space root. And it says, what's your password? So enter a very strong password and then enter it again. Okay, and we can see password updated successfully. Now we're going to create a new user. The user that I'm going to create is called UniFi admin, but you can create whatever username you like. Okay, so I'm going to say add user UniFi admin, and then it's going to ask me for a password for UniFi admin. Make sure this is a strong password as well, and take note of it so that you don't forget it. And then when it asks you for some user information such as the name, the room number, the work phone, the home phone, and other, basically you can just keep hitting enter until you get back to the main prompt. So we've added a user, UniFi admin, and we've set the password, but now we need to tell Ubuntu, hey, this user, UniFi admin, they have rights to be able to run sudo commands or super user commands. So we're going to say usermod-ag sudo UniFi admin. That's basically putting the UniFi admin in the sudo group. Next, we're going to want to generate a key pair, right? So a public-private key pair. This is because we're going to be setting up secure key authentication to the server. We're not going to be logging in with a username and password. We're going to be logging in with a public-private key authentication. So we're going to say ssh-keygen, which, by the way, I am generating this key on this server, but you can also generate this key on a different server and then copy it over to this server. That's more advanced and that's beyond the scope of this documentation, but that is also something that you can do. You don't have to generate the secure key on this server. So enter the file in which to save the key. We're just going to take the default. And now, do we want our key to have a passphrase? For added security, it's recommended that you add a passphrase to your key. Basically, you're going to have to log in with your public-private key pair. If you don't choose a passphrase, all you need is the public-private key to log in. But if you add a passphrase, you need both the private key as well as the passphrase on the private key to get logged into the server. For the purposes of this documentation, we're going to say no passphrase. Okay, so now we have our key generated. Now we need to copy the key from the root user that we're currently logged in as over to the UniFi admin user. So we're going to say ssh-copy-id and then username at server. So I'm going to say UniFi admin at unifi2021.crosstalksolutions.com. And it's going to say, are you sure you want to connect? We're going to say yes. And then it's going to ask us UniFi admin's password. Okay, and we can see number of keys added is 1. All right, so we're on to part 6, and this is where we're going to start securing our server. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to modify our SSH service configuration file, and we're going to tell it that we don't want root to be able to log in, and we're also going to tell it that we're not allowing password authentication to log into the server. So basically we're saying you can't log in as root, and you can't log in as any other user with just a password. You have to have the private key to log into this server. So we're going to say nano, and I don't actually have to use sudo nano because we're logged in as root still, so we're running all of our commands as root. I'm just going to say nano-w/etc/ssh-d_config. And we're going to scroll down until we find the line right here that says permit root login, and we're going to change this from yes to no. Then you want to scroll down even further until you find password authentication. Now this is by default commented out. So first we need to remove the hash symbol. That's going to uncomment this line, and we're going to change password authentication yes to password authentication no. Now from here you do Control X, and it's going to ask you, do you want to save your changes? We're going to say Y, and then just press enter to write those changes to the same file that you were originally editing. So Control X, yes, enter. Now that we've made those changes, we need to reload the SSH service. So we're going to say systemctl reload sshd, and now the SSH service has been reloaded. But do not close this root window yet, because we want to make sure that we don't that we can revert those changes if we accidentally locked ourselves out of the server or something like that. So we're going to re-log in as UniFi admin with our public-private key pair, and then once we have verified that that's working, then you can close down this initial putty screen where you're logged in as root. Before we do that though, we need to download a copy of our private key file and then remove the private key off of this server, right? We don't want to store our private and public key on the same server. That's like basically, leaving a key next to the lock on your door. It's not a good idea because anyone can come by and grab that key and unlock the door. So we want to remove the key, the private key, if you will, from the server. So we're going to first look at our private key. We're going to say cat ~/.ssh/id_rsa. And this is going to show us, let me make this a little bit bigger. This is going to show us our private key. And you want to basically select and copy this entire thing. Now it's okay that I'm showing this on screen because by the time this video is produced, I will have destroyed this server as well as this public-private key pair. So go ahead and try to write all this down if you want and try to log into my server. The server's going to be gone by the time you're watching this. So I've selected all the text. I'm going to Control Insert to copy it. And then I'm going to open up something like Notepad, or in my case, I use a program called Edit Plus. And I'm going to paste all of that information from the private key file into Edit Plus, and we're going to save that key somewhere secure on my desktop or just in a secure location somewhere. And once you have saved the private key, at this point we can delete that private key off of this server. We're going to say rm /.ssh/id_rsa, and that private key has now been deleted. Now we want to use this private key to log into the server, and I like to use PuTTY to log into all of my servers. This process may be a little bit different if you use something other than PuTTY, But for PuTTY users, we need to convert that private key into the .ppk PuTTY format. So we're going to open up a program called PuTTyGen. If you have PuTTY installed on your computer, you should also have PuTTyGen. And here we are in PuTTyGen. We're going to click Load, and then we're going to open up the text file, or the file where we just saved the private key. Okay, so I've loaded that key, and we can see here that I have successfully imported the key into PuTTyGen. We're going to say OK, and now we're going to save the private key. We don't have a passphrase, we're just going to say yes. And I'm just going to call it ID_RSA, and it's going to save it as a .ppk file. Okay, so I've saved that private key. Now we're going to close PuTTyGen. And now we want to test logging in as UniFi admin with our private key. So we're going to open up PuTTY again, or you can do New Session. And in this new session, first we want to put in our host name, unifi2021.crosstalksolutions.com. And then we're going to click over here on the left-hand window. We're going to open up SSH, and then we're going to click on Auth for authentication. And right here where it says private key file for authentication, we're going to browse and find the .ppk that we just created. Okay, so I've selected that .ppk file. I'm going to scroll back up to session. And what I'm going to do here is I want to save this session, right? Because I want to be connecting to this UniFi server over and over, and I don't want to have to recreate the PuTTY session every time and remember, oh, where was that private key file and what port did I use for SSH and all that sort of good stuff. So I'm just going to copy the name, and I'm going to paste it down here to saved sessions, and then we're going to click Save. So now I've saved that session, and it should be listed down in the Save Sessions. I can click on it and click Load and bring back all of these settings so that I don't have to remember them every time. But now let's just go ahead and click Open, and we're going to get this same security alert. Just say yes, and then log in as, we're not going to log in as root. Remember, we disabled the ability for root to log in. So we're going to log in as UniFi admin, the user that we created, a few steps ago. And it says authenticating, and boom, we are logged in. Okay, so just that easy. We have now logged in using as UniFi admin with our private key, and now I can close out the original root session that I had open. Exit. Okay, so we've done a pretty good job of securing down the server, at least access to the server so far. We've changed, we're not allowed to log in as root. We've created a user that is allowed to log in, and we've basically said that you have to have the private key file to log in as that new UniFi admin user. But let's secure it down even more, because by default, SSH runs on port 22. But everyone knows that SSH runs on port 22. So do we want to keep using that standard port? Definitely not. Let's choose a different port to log in with SSH. So we're going to say sudo. Notice now we have to use superuser commands because we're no longer logged in as root. Sudo nano-w/etc sshd_config. It's going to ask us for our UniFi admin password. And then right down here, we can see that we are port 22 by default, but we want to change that to something else. Now, I usually use just something like port 2222. I make it a little bit less obscure. Other people say that it's better to use something, way up higher in the port range that's just not at all easy to guess and not something that anyone is usually ever scanning on a regular basis. Something like maybe 29999, right? That would be a good port to use. For the purposes of this demonstration, though, I'm just going to keep it at 2222. And then we're going to save and exit that file. Once again, we want to restart the SSH service with sudo systemctl reload sshd. And now we want to log in once again. But again, don't close down this session until you have successfully logged into your new PuTTY session. So we're going to say new session. Now in this case, I can load the previous settings. So I've loaded the old settings that I created earlier, but I'm still connecting to port 22. So I'm going to change that to whichever port I used or that I just set SSH to. In my case, it's 2222. Might be something different for you. And then we're going to click Save again so that we can save these settings one more time. And now, once again, let's click Open. Click Yes on the security breach notification and log in as UniFi admin. And there we go. We have successfully logged in as UniFi admin using a public-private key pair on a non-standard SSH port. All right, now we can close down our old session, and we're good to move on to part 11. So in part 11, we're going to be enabling the firewall. So basically, we're going to close down all ports that we don't need and make sure that we're blocking everything. When I lock down my servers, I like to lock them down to specific WAN IP addresses, meaning that in order to connect on the UniFi GUI port, which is 8443, or in order to connect in on SSH, which in my case is 2222, I'm only going to allow connections to those two ports from an authorized WAN IP address. In that case, in this case, the WAN IP address of my home office here. And so to do that, I'm not going to show you guys my WAN IP address, but to do that, we're going to say sudo UFW allow from, and now here I want to put in my home IP address or my office IP address or any IP address where I would like to connect from. And by the way, you can run this command multiple times if you have multiple places that you need to connect from. So I'm going to say sudo UFW allow from 1.2.3.4. This is just a made-up IP address. We'll pretend that 1.2.3.4 is my WAN IP address. To any on port, and then whichever ports we want to open. So in our case, it's going to be 2222. And then I'm going to want to run the command again for port 9090. That's for a program called Cockpit that's optional, but we're going to be installing that a little bit later in the video. And I'm also going to open it up for port 8443, which is the UniFi controller graphical user interface. So I'm going to go ahead and add those rules now, but I'm going to do that with my WAN IP address that I'm not going to show you guys on camera. Okay, so I've added those rules. There are a few other rules that we need to add, but these rules we're going to want to open up to the whole wide world. So we have a stun port that we need to allow. That is UDP port 3478. We're also going to allow the UniFi inform port, which is port 8080. So instead of locking those down to a WAN IP address, we're just going to say sudo UFW allow for stun, it's 3478/UDP. And then we're also going to say allow 8080 for the inform port. Notice though I'm not putting /UDP here because this is a TCP port. So we're just going to say sudo UFW allow 8080. Then there's a couple of optional ports that you can add. This is port 8880 and 8843. Those are ports that you're going to want to use if you're planning on setting up a guest authentication portal through UniFi. In our cases, and for the purposes of this documentation, I'm not setting up those any sort of guest portal, so I'm not going to add those ports to my own firewall rules, but I do need to add some rules for Let's Encrypt. So we're going to allow port 80, and we're going to allow port 443. Now, opening up those ports, 80 and 443, those are very commonly used ports. That's HTTP and HTTPS. We're only using them for Let's Encrypt. If someone tries to browse to your server on either of those ports without anything appended to the end of that request, they're just going to get a request timed out. It's not going to show them anything. But if you want to secure everything down a little bit better, you can actually add some hooks to Let's Encrypt that will open up these ports just before Let's Encrypt tries to renew a certificate, and then it'll close those ports just after Let's Encrypt finishes updating its certificate. Again, doing that is beyond the scope of this video and beyond the scope of this documentation, but I did want to let you know that that is something that is possible that you can do. Okay, so we've got all of our rules in place. Let's go ahead and turn on the firewall. Now keep in mind, when you turn on this firewall, if you did not enter your rules correctly, you are going to lock yourself out of your server. So be very sure that you entered in all of your rules correctly before you actually enable the firewall. Sudo UFW enable, and we're going to say yes. And now firewall is active and enabled on system startup. If you would like to check the rules that you entered, you can say sudo UFW status, and now you should see all of the rules that you just put in to the UFW firewall. Okay, next let's go ahead and update our server. I'm going to say sudo apt update. This is going to check for any new software that's available. And now we're going to say sudo apt upgrade -y. This is going to install any new software that's available. Once the updates have completed, we're going to run one more command, and that's sudo apt dist upgrade -y. This will update our distribution. I don't think there's going to be anything available now. If I run this command, it should just, yeah, so there was nothing that it could update. But in the future, if you're watching this, 6 months from when I recorded it, there may be some packages. So you might want to just run that command just in case. And now that we've just done a full update, for good measure, let's go ahead and reboot the server. Sudo reboot and press enter. All right, while that server is rebooting, go ahead and click on this yellow banner here. That's going to take you through to the Crosstalk Amazon store. That's a bunch of stuff that we recommend, not just UniFi and Ubiquiti stuff, but other equipment as well. It is a little bit outdated, I will tell you that, but if you click through this yellow banner and then go find anything else that you want to buy from Amazon, we'll get a little bit of credit for that as well, and we certainly appreciate any of the referrals that we get. After the reboot, log back into your system, and now we've got a little bit of house cleaning work to do, starting with setting the time zone. So we're going to type sudo dpkg-reconfigure tz data. Enter in your UniFi admin password, and now you can set your system time zone. I'm going to select US and then Pacific Ocean, and we can see that the local time is now 10:59 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is correct. Along those same lines, we also want to install NTP, that is the Network Time Protocol. So we're going to say sudo apt update and 2 ampersands sudo apt install NTP-y. After about 30 seconds or so, NTP is installed, and we can verify the service status by typing service NTP status. And we can see that it is active and running. Hit Q to get out of the status, and I'm going to clear up my screen again here. You can also verify that NTP has the correct time information for your server by just typing date. And we can see here Friday 22nd of January, 11 a.m. Pacific time. That is correct. Next, we're going to set up a swap file for this system. Now, I've had some people tell me that a swap file is not necessary, and other people swear that a swap file is necessary. Like most things, the truth is probably in between there somewhere, so we're just going to go ahead and set up a swap file, but this step is completely optional if you don't believe that you need one. So we're going to start by saying sudo fallocate -l4g, that's the length of the file, the -l switch. Fallocate, by the way, is just a command that creates a file of whatever length you want. And we're going to call the file /swap file. Now if you do ls-la/, you should see swap file. Here we have it right here. We can see it's a 4 gig file. Now we're going to change permissions on the swap file that we just created. So sudo chmod 600/swap file. Now we're going to say sudo make swap/swap file. That's turning it into a swap file for us. And then we need to turn swap on, or basically tell the system to use it. So we're going to say sudo swap on/swap file, which is great. So our swap file is now working, but if we reboot the server, we'd have to go through all of those steps again. So we want to make sure that when we reboot, we also reinitialize that swap file. So we're going to take this command here. It's sudo sh-c echo, and then we're basically echoing this information here, /swap file non-swap sw00, and we're putting that into the etc fstab file. So we're going to copy that and shift enter to paste. And now if we say cat/etc/fstab, we see that information down at the bottom, which when the server boots up, it will now set that up as our swap file. Next, we're going to install a couple of miscellaneous programs. We're going to start with a program called Cockpit. Cockpit is basically just a web GUI for monitoring system resources. We're going to say sudo apt install cockpit-y. This step is totally optional. If you don't want to install Cockpit, you certainly don't have to. Okay, once Cockpit has been installed, you can verify that it's working by bringing up a new browser tab and going to the IP address or FQDN of your UniFi server, :9090. So here we can see unify2021.crosstalksolutions.com, :9090. We're going to get past the SSL warnings, and here we have Cockpit. So I'm going to log in with UniFi admin. And let me expand this out. Now we can see our system. So we see the system's up to date. We can see the CPU and memory status. And if I click on dashboard right here on the left, I actually get a live view of whatever I want to be looking at. So here's the CPU, memory, network, and disk I/O. Now we're going to install one more miscellaneous program, and that is the haveged. I'm not sure exactly how you say that. Haveged program. Basically, this is a unpredictable random number generator for Linux. I'm not sure if it's used so much as it used to be, but in the past, having haveged installed on the server sped up the booting of UniFi quite significantly. So we're going to put it in anyways. It doesn't hurt anything, even if it doesn't actually do anything to UniFi. So sudo apt install haveged-y, and there we go. Now we're going to set up apt auto remove. Basically, auto remove is a way to clean up old stuff out of the system that you don't need. In particular, this helps keep your /boot volume clear and clean so that it never fills up, because if /boot fills up, it can cause problems for the server. So we're going to say, first let's just run auto remove and see what it does. We'll say sudo apt auto remove -y, and we can see that it says the following packages will be removed, and it would clear up 359 megabytes worth of disk space. So we ran that, it removed that, it cleared up some disk space, but now let's set that to automatically run every so often. So we're going to run this once a month by putting this command here, that same one we just ran, sudo apt auto remove -y, into a file called etc/cron-monthly/auto remove. So basically we're creating this auto remove file in the cron monthly folder, which means everything in that folder runs once a month. And then once we have that file in place, shift insert and paste it, we're going to set the permissions to make it executable. So sudo chmod +x on the auto remove file that we just created. There we go. Now if I say ls-la/etc/cron.monthly, we can see that I have an executable file called auto remove. All right, so all of that has been in preparation for installing UniFi. Let's finally get to the actual UniFi installation. The first step is to install the OpenJDK8. This is Java. So we're going to copy and paste this line right here. And paste. Now, notice on all of these, I'm doing sudo apt update, and then I'm doing the actual installation command here, appended to it. You don't always have to do sudo apt update. If you've just run it recently, like when we just installed Cockpit, you don't need to run it again. You can just take the second half of this command and do that instead. It just takes a little bit longer to do the sudo apt update first. I put that in there just to be thorough. All right, OpenJDK8 has been installed. The next thing we need to do is we're going to add an apt source for UniFi, or in other words, when you do a sudo apt update, it looks through a whole bunch of different lists of software that can be installed and tries to find the latest versions of anything in those lists of software. What we're doing now is we're adding another list to look through, and that is the list that contains our UniFi installation files. So we're just going to paste that command here. In addition, we need to make sure that we trust that new list that we just created. So we're going to add the Ubiquiti or UniFi GPG key, the trusted GPG key. We have downloaded that and added it, and now we can install UniFi. So sudo apt update and sudo apt install UniFi-y. As of the recording of this video, the latest version of UniFi is version 6.0.43, but your version may be different if you're watching this, long after I actually recorded it. UniFi has now been installed. I usually wait about 30 seconds for it to go through its sort of startup scripts, make sure that it's running. We can say service UniFi status. And we should see a green active and running, as we see right here. Now you're going to want to open UniFi in a browser, so navigate to the IP or FQDN of your UniFi server and append :8443 to the end. There we go. So I've got unify2021.crosstalksolutions.com :8443, and then we can see here that I'm getting the SSL warning. Don't worry about this. We're going to install Let's Encrypt next, but for now, let's go ahead and go through our UniFi setup wizard. So name your controller. We're just going to say UniFi 2021. We're going to check this box to accept the terms. Or if you want to restore from a previous version of UniFi or a different server, you can alternately upload a backup file by clicking this link right here. We're going to click Next. Now, we're going to sign in with our Ubiquiti single sign-in account. But if you want, you can switch to Advanced Setup, which allows you to not only disable remote access, where you're not going to be connecting out to UniFi's cloud, but you can also disable using your Ubiquiti single sign-on for login to this server. Basically, you can make a local user instead of relying on Ubiquiti's single sign-on if that is what you're interested in. In my case, though, we're just going to sign in with our Ubiquiti single sign-in account. Step 3 of 6 is a couple of settings that you can turn on or off. I certainly just would leave them both on and take the defaults. This is going to be automatically optimize my network. It just sets some settings that are optimal for most networks. You can always change that once you log into the GUI. And then you can also enable auto backups. Click Next. We don't have any devices right now, and you probably won't have any devices because this device setup, step 4 of 6, is looking on the local area LAN or local area network for devices. And since this is a hosted controller, there's no devices connected to the LAN of this controller, so there shouldn't be anything in this list. Click Next, and then we have our Wi-Fi setup. If you want to create your first wireless SSID, you can put that information here, wireless name as well as password. I'm going to skip for now, and then you can review your configuration and make sure that everything looks good, including your time zone, and click Finish. And there we go. We're going to say Don't Send on the Security and Analytics, and now we have a working UniFi controller. But if you look up here in the top left, we are not secure. So the next step is to add a Let's Encrypt certificate and make sure we have secure HTTPS communication to our UniFi server. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is install CertBot, which is the service that will keep our Let's Encrypt certificate renewed every 90 days or so. And we want to also install Python 3-CertBot Apache, which is the connector for the Apache web service. Once that has been installed, we now need to generate our Let's Encrypt certificate. You want to use this command, sudo certbot -apache-d, and then give it your own FQDN for your own UniFi controller. So we're going to copy this and shift insert to paste it. Now it's going to ask you for an email address. This is basically where they're going to email you if there are any issues with your Let's Encrypt certificate. And now you have to agree to the terms and service. We're going to say agree. Will you be willing to share your email address? Up to you. I'm going to say no in this case. And then finally, it's going to ask us whether we want to redirect all HTTP requests to HTTPS, which is a good idea. So we're going to say to make that redirect happen. And there we go. So here we can see, congratulations, your certificate and chain have been saved at, and it gives us all of the information. Now at this point, we have a Let's Encrypt certificate installed onto our server, but UniFi doesn't know about it. So we have to tell UniFi to check for that Let's Encrypt certificate or install that Let's Encrypt certificate into UniFi's services. And there's a developer named Steve Jenkins, I have a link to his article about this, who created a nice script for making that happen. So we're going to basically download Steve Jenkins's script here. And then we need to set that script to be executable with sudo chmod +x. And then we need to edit that script and make a couple of changes. So we're going to say sudo nano-w/user/local/bin/unify ssl import.sh. And there's a few things we need to do. So for the UniFi host name, you want to put your actual fully qualified domain name. In my case, it's unifi2021.crosstalksolutions.com. And then there's different rules for what type of operating system we're using. In our case, we're using Ubuntu. So we want to comment out anything to do with Red Hat or CentOS, and we want to uncomment anything that has to do with Debian or Ubuntu. So we've uncommented these configuration options here, and finally down here for Let's Encrypt, we want to set LE mode or Let's Encrypt mode to yes, and then hit Control X, yes, enter to save and exit Nano. And then finally we want to run that script. So we're going to say sudo and then the name of the script, stopping UniFi controller, importing the keys, and then restarting UniFi with the Let's Encrypt certificate. There we go, it says done, and now if you open up a new, close the browser window that you had open with UniFi before and open up a new browser window. So I've signed back into UniFi, and as we can see here, for unifi2021.crosstalksolutions.com, we have connection is secure, and we have a valid certificate issued to my fully qualified domain name. That SSL certificate is going to renew periodically since it's a Let's Encrypt certificate. So we also want to make sure that we're running the UniFi SSL import on a regular basis. We're going to put the import into our cron.daily file, or we're going to create a new file called UniFi SSL import in the etc cron.daily directory. That way we're going to run this script every single day. Now if there's no new certificate, it's not going to do anything. But if it happens to find that the Let's Encrypt certificate was renewed, then it's going to re-import the new Let's Encrypt certificate. All right, so we're going to paste that next command in. This is editing a file called etc cron.daily/UniFi SSL import. This is a new file that we're creating. And then we're going to copy these two lines here. And paste them into that file, and then Control X, yes, enter to save and exit. Now we want to change the permissions and the owner of the file, so we're going to change it so that root owns that file with sudo chown root and then the name of the file. And we're also going to make it so that that file is executable. Now if we do ls-la/etc cron.daily, we now see our UniFi SSL import command or file, executable file, is in that directory. Finally, totally optional step, but if you want to test your Let's Encrypt certificate, you can go to this URL right here, sslabs.com. It's an SSL test, and just change the URL that I have here to your own fully qualified domain name. Just replace what I have in red. And when you run that test, essentially you should come back with an A rating on your UniFi controller FQDN. Okay, so there it is. That's all there is to it. You should now have a fully functional and secure UniFi controller running the latest version of UniFi. And if you ever want to update the server, all you have to do is run apt-get update and then apt-get upgrade-y, and that will update all of your Linux packages, as well as it will update UniFi to the latest and greatest version. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and the time and effort that it took to put into it. If you guys are interested in buying me a beer, there is a link down below for that. Make sure you like and subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions for more content just like this, and we will see you in the next video.